Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cloud Architects podcast. You're here with myself, Nicholas Blank. In the same time zone, I have Warren Dutoy.
Hello.
And in a very far removed time zone, not that we're going to pick on him for any antipodean sport losses of late, Chris Goosen.
Hello. I have no idea what you're talking about, by the way. What losses I could say, but okay.
Well, as you know, as our guest Australian representative, there's been wins and losses, and of course, I'm going to lump everything that happened in New Zealand on plate as well. And
Right.
For our fans who have no idea what we're talking about, there's things like rugby and cricket that we care about rather deeply as competing countries.
Yes, I'd say cricket for sure, but we're not in that part. Well, actually, they are playing cricket at the moment, I think. Not local to us anyway. I don't watch rugby ever, so I wouldn't know about that. But yeah, cricket, sure. I'm sure our guest also probably likes cricket quite a lot as well.
We have a cracker of a guest today. We have Prashanth, who is joining us from another time zone. And gosh, he's got a wonderful introduction. I don't want to take anything away from that because he has a marvelous history. So Prashanth, would you mind introducing yourself to our followers?
Hey everyone, Nick, Warren, Chris, thanks for having me on the podcast. And super excited to talk to you. I kind of went through the audience that your podcast has. They're the people whom I like to talk a lot about. I'll get to that in a bit, but hey everyone, I'm Prashanth Nanjodappa. I'm based out of Bangalore, India. I'm born in Bangalore, but worked in a lot of countries all along my career. But over the past 6-7 years, I have been stationed in Bangalore, but working for Progress, which is headquartered in Boston. And here, my responsibility is product management and marketing for Chef line of products. We acquired Chef about 2 years ago, and Chef has had started infrastructure as code. It was one of the tool, the namesake Chef, which is kind of very popular. And if you are in DevOps, I don't think it needs any introduction. It was in the realm of infrastructure as code, and it has been around about 12 years. And we acquired it 2 years ago. And all along my career, I have worked in embedded as well as cloud development. And in past 10 to 12 years, I've been focused on product management. And until acquisition of Chef, I have been building products mostly on platform as a service and also software as a service for enterprise software. I have been a huge beneficiary of DevOps, which had given me a lot of insights of advantages of taking DevOps as a methodology and as a part of our culture, organization culture, and also using infrastructure as code. But I had no experience building such a product. And when we acquired Chef, it worked out for my advantage. I started with no presumptions. I had to, me and a couple of others who came in from Progress, we had to talk to our customers and our solution architects, customer success managers who had immense experience. I spoke to about 200 odd customers in that process and learned what variations they have. I think we kind of box DevOps and Agile in a very typecasted manner, but there is so many variations. We have small businesses, we have large enterprises, we have tech companies like Google, Facebook, all of them. There are so many different flavors. Had opportunity to know, learn, and in fact bring that into my day job, which is to build products and to increase our reach of our product portfolio. So super excited to talk to you all.
That's wonderful. What a cracking introduction. So thank you. I want to lean on both Warren as well as Prashanth, because both of you are in this DevOps world, slightly different angles, and we're going to unpack that a little bit more on the show. But between the two of you, do you think we can agree on a little bit of a definition of what DevOps actually is for the normal human being? If you had to explain it to your mom, how would you explain DevOps?
I wouldn't. Sorry. I think it's a bit tough. Look, I think the first misconception about DevOps that anybody makes is that it's a product. Like when somebody says DevOps, like if somebody's using Azure DevOps, they'll think it's Azure DevOps. If somebody is using, let's say, Chef or Atlassian or GitHub Actions or whatever the product may be, they'll immediately associate DevOps with that, right? They don't sort of think that DevOps is more of a methodology, how you do things, not what you do them with. And it's bigger than just a CI/CD pipeline. DevOps. I mean,
sorry, CI/CD for the humans amongst us.
Integration, continuous integration, continuous delivery. And then again, it's. I mean, you can go into agile, and you can go into sprints, and you can go into boards, and you can go into all of this lovely stuff that exists inside of DevOps. DevOps isn't just for software development. It can also be for deploying infrastructure. It can also be for so many different things. But it's the methodology behind it, right? And I think that there's the definition is different for most people's depending on how they implement it inside the organization. I guess, suppose it could like not waterfall. I don't know. I mean, what would you say?
I agree. I think it's definitely, let's say what it is not. It's definitely not a tool, like a tool, or it is not a process. I think these are some misconceptions. I think it's a cultural element. It has a cultural element to it. It has a host of philosophies and practices and tools. Let me kind of answer this question in a different way on how I understood DevOps in my experience. When I moved into product management role, it was a startup in India called Nallarity Communications, and we were virtualizing telecom, a telephone line for small and medium businesses. So we were in the business of providing telephone numbers over the cloud and give this EPBAX or IVR capabilities. If someone calls, any small business can go to a website, click and get a virtual number. So this had a data center component because as part of regulation, we had to get physical copper wires routed into data center, and we had to virtualize it. That means we had to make that available as software, and then make it available to end users in a very easy manner. Now there were three different players here. One is our database administrators who knew, and it was on bare metal, right? And they knew only a few things, and there was a database there, and there was these physical devices where copper wires were coming and getting connected. And then we have middleware developers who are responsible for using open source software and others to abstract the complexity. And then there is an application developer who is typically a full stack developer or a web developer who makes it accessible to end user. And we were always, like, I think first 6 months, it took me about 6 months to figure out why are we so slow. And it took, the main reason was people didn't really know what was happening one layer below them. And most importantly, they didn't empathize. If the database went down, they were pointing at a person and saying, hey, it's his problem. We took, out of necessity, we took a step of consolidating teams. And in that process, we said a team needs to not just look after application development, but also managing the infrastructure and deploying it. Right? And this brought so many issues into surface. But after 3 to 4 months of that journey, we had a small team, about 6 to 7 people, and each small team of 6 to 7 people were responsible for a particular functionality, and they were responsible for building it, deploying it, and even managing after it is being deployed. right? And this is what I feel is the very essence of DevOps, where a team who does not own just developing application, but also owns the responsibility of deploying and making sure that it is running in a consistent and a reliable manner. And the practices of DevOps, the tool chains that come in DevOps, they all help in making this happen, to make your deployment faster, reliable, and taking your product, to market faster.
That's a good one. Yeah, faster. I think that's definitely one of the things that we've all experienced here is the speed at which things can be deployed. I mean, I think if you have to look at containers, and I have to say it every show, Kubernetes, I mean, they were born out of DevOps, right? So like, you think Kubernetes came after DevOps became a thing, right? So you would, the deployment methodologies that you would use to deploy to a Kubernetes cluster, like rolling updates and that sort of stuff, that was born out of DevOps. Being able to deploy something in a container without actually having to replace the entire OS, right? Or build the entire OS and all the frameworks and things, that came from DevOps, right? Because we figured out that there was an easier way to do that. Automate it and make sure that there was less for you to do so that you could get it out faster.
Completely agree. I think one thing that teams who are successful, are seeing the success through DevOps, they can't stop improving the efficiency. Right? Your point was spot on, where I think Kubernetes or containers, I think containers first, Kubernetes a little later, came out of the necessity of making that faster. We had virtual machines. That was the first instance of that, and package everything in a virtual machine. And that's where Chef infrastructure as code and all of these comes in. That gave the first, removed the first hurdle of moving away from the bare metal. And then that wasn't fast enough because the operating system doesn't change much. The software that you install doesn't change much. What changes more and more is the software that we build. Right, and then containers came in. We had various versions, Mesosphere, ECS, all of those things evolved. I think now there is a lot of centralization or consolidation towards Kubernetes, all in the spirit of moving fast without having to compromise on quality.
I don't know if you've seen, like, just as an anecdote, on LinkedIn, there's a documentary of Kubernetes. Have you seen it? So it's like this 20-minute video. I think it's in 2 parts, actually, where they tell you how Kubernetes was born, right? And obviously Mesosphere was there, and Docker was there, and Docker had taken the world by storm, and it was this big thing.
And there was Docker Swarm also.
Yeah, Docker Swarm was coming, and then you know how hard this tiny little team inside of Google had to push to get the authorization to actually build Kubernetes. It's actually really cool. And then next thing you know, Brandon Burns ends up working for us, right? So he's now working at Microsoft. But it was it was super funny to see that. And I think, like, okay, so then that's a question for you. Your next question is, what is your favorite product, okay, or solution or service that you've seen in your career where you are now? You even if you built it, that's cool too. Like, that you've seen it has changed the way you do things. So, like, what has impacted your life the most when it comes to DevOps right now?
So, you put me on a spot, but there are.
You can say GitHub Actions. I mean, that's cool.
The reason that I'm thinking is there were so many of them. I think this is a microcosm. We had so many such changes. But if I think about it, there are 2 things that I would say which impacted the most. One is the concept of continuous integration and delivery, right? The CI/CD, as we know, that actually made help the quality aspect. And shift left is now a thing to talk about, but we realized about that very early without knowing that it is shift left. I think CI/CD helped developers not slog their asses, fixing the same thing again and again. They could do something, move on. The ability of having that test harness or that safety harness, where that if it passes through these checkpoints, things will pass. Right? It had evolution of its own. When I was a developer, I used Jenkins, but I think there is a lot many more in that world. But I think the CI/CD is the first bit which helped. It was not so much. I mean, CD came a little early, but I think CI helped the dev, and CD kind of helped bring this whole dev and ops together. And on the deployment side, I go hands down to infrastructure as code. Right? And that made things simple. And infrastructure as code comes in two flavors. One is for provisioning, and second is for configuring. And both of these things were laborious tasks. I have spent I think 2 or 3 nights continuous with our ops team trying to figure out what is wrong with the server in Bangalore, our data center in Bangalore, and data center in Delhi. It's working in Bangalore, but it is not working in Delhi. It's the same code. At the end of it, it was just one configuration. Instead of 16-bit, it was 32-bit. It's something small, but it took six people 3 days to fix. I think infrastructure as code solved that phenomenally. You can have consistency, and you can codify, and also you can version control it, right? So you then roll back, or you roll forward. It becomes light code.
You see who broke it. So you can see who broke it.
Yeah. Right. And that's where there is nuance. One is provisioning, and another is configuration management. Provisioning is required for you to set up the basic infrastructure, and configuration is once the infrastructure is set up, you go and set the bits and bytes to make sure that the end state is maintained. I think I would put these two as my favorite. I'm sorry, I couldn't pick one.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I have a question for the collective. So I'm going to look at what Chris and I do for a living, which for decades, frankly, has centered around virtual machines and networking, and even in Azure, if we deploy off a template, somewhere there's still a network and a virtual machine, and then there's something inside that virtual machine, and then we have to patch it, right? And this kind of goes away from DevOps to SOE, more of a standard operating environment, where I want to build something and then I want to maintain it, and it may have a whole patch cycle that's attached to it, right? Are we still talking DevOps? Can I build virtual machines and put things inside those virtual machines and then maintain not only those versions, but address the security patches that come for the operating system, maybe change my networking configuration without destroying everything that I have, but maintaining the solution that I have, which may even contain live data?
Yeah.
Jeez, you can sell Chef.
I don't know. So my question is, am I still in the DevOps world? Is this, are we maintaining with DevOps, or are we just creating things? Because my understanding of CI/CD is that I have source code that's sitting in a repository somewhere, and then I update what's in the repository, and it's continuous integration, and then continuous deployment comes along and goes, here's the new version, right? But whatever was there isn't there anymore, right?
I was smiling because of 2 reasons. One, sorry, Chris, Warren, go ahead. You're saying something?
No, you go.
So 2 things was constantly on my mind. First, the book, Phoenix Project. I think that's such an excellent book. and it has so much humor. I don't know if it was by intent or maybe I have a dark sense of humor and I found it humorous, but I think it's the first one. But whatever you are saying is very well captured in that book, and they talk about how DevOps or adopting these methodologies help them. And it's the same kind of concepts that came up. And second, like Warren was saying, that's where Chef is. Like we help solve exactly the same problem, and we help organizations codify their definition of virtual machines. Right, what goes into that virtual machine, an operating system, a specific version of that operating system, and then if you need OpenJDK, if you need the database, if you need let's say load balancer, right? And and what specific bits and bytes of configuration that it needs to have is what we help do in an automated way. And there are two aspects to it. One is end state management, which is where you say that no matter what, I want my virtual machines or my compute or network to have these configurations. If it changes, alert me. And and they typically have some workflows if it needs approval. If there are no workflows, you bring it back to that end state. And so you don't need the conventional SRE to go keep watching for these things for every small change. For example, someone went and did a monkey patch, right, on a particular server. So the end state says that I want it to be on a version 2.3.4, but a monkey patch was done and put to version 3.0. So these the end state management makes sure that every hour or every periodic cycle it monitors and whatever has drifted, and then it brings it back. And these drifts are reported as incidents. So your CIO and others can monitor that and then assess. Was it intentional? Was it by accident? And they take corrective action. But important thing is your infrastructure stays in a reliable state. Right? So this is first part of it. And second part of it is the patch management. I think that's quintessential. There could be, for example, we recently had day zero vulnerability. Right, like that, many such vulnerabilities get surfaced, and it is imminent for you to go patch them. And this is very simple as upgrading a specific version, but I mean, that's what people think, but it is not as simple as that. We have customers who are having close to about 100,000 virtual machines. Like we call them nodes in a private cloud, and they run critical infrastructure, not just if it goes down, there is business loss, but if things get screwed up, they have to pay loads and loads of money because they operate in banking, financial, such regulated areas. So you got to roll them out in a controlled manner. So you apply patch in a small set, see if that works, if it maintains that acceptable end state, and then you roll out. So these are possible with tools like Chef, and there are many others who are in this domain, which help make this smooth, much smoother than what it used to be several years ago, and that is very much part of DevOps, because this is the base, right? I think Warren was talking some time back that when we talk about DevOps, there are infrastructure teams and there are application teams. We mostly talk about DevOps in the context of application teams, but I think infrastructure management teams also adopt this methodology, this culture, because of which they become efficient and they can roll out the baseline infrastructure. That's the product that they offer to their customers who are developers, who are teams within an organization. That's what they give them. So for them, they can roll out such newer versions of the platform faster and in a reliable manner.
A follow-up question on that. And Warren, earlier you mentioned bicep. I'm a single guy, a simple guy, not a single guy.
I was going to say, just
my wife.
Going to be in trouble.
Just revert that to
How to have a very interesting welcome home. You know, I post on my Facebook that I'm single. No, that would be wrong. So from a simplicity point of view, you mentioned Bicep. And Bicep is this provisioning language, right? And Chef is this provisioning language.
Well,
how do I choose?
Not really. So, the thing is, I think a lot of companies develop their own language, but it's because it makes sense to them, right? So, like for instance, Bicep, which is the next iteration of ARM templates, or actually utilizes ARM templates and those sorts of things, it just makes more sense now. It's it's very. I mean, if you have to compare Bicep and Terraform together, they're very, very similar. I mean, and then if you look at, like, let's say Ansible, and then you look at the manifests from Puppet or Chef or whatever the case would be. I mean, Chef just decided to call them something rad, like recipes. So, I mean, that's quite cool, right? So, so I think every company in some way, shape, or form decides to use their language in a way that makes more sense so that someone can understand it and use it. You mentioned SRE earlier. And so for those who don't know, SRE is a site reliability engineer. Right? That's technically a job spec that was created for things like desired state configuration and Chef and stuff. So, like, in order to be a site reliability engineer, you need to know DevOps or Chef, and then you can be one, right? Because it's, as Prashanth said, you can control the desired state of the machine and make sure that it is always there, right? So somebody, and the coolest thing is, like, let's say somebody wants to test something, right? They'll go and they'll test that monkey patch, knowing that in an hour it's gone. Right? So they'll test it like that. They'll see what happens, but they know that in 15 minutes, half an hour, it's gone, which is great because it's, like you said, safety net. It's just going to go away and it'll revert back to a version that it did work on. And then you can do these, like, rolling updates. When you were talking about the rings earlier, I mean, if you have to think hundreds of thousands of VMs and things like that, we know by speaking to certain people in the product group that there's millions of bare metal Exchange servers running Exchange Online.
Yes.
Right? How on earth do you think they can configure a million Exchange servers? Exactly what you said. It's this.
So here's what I
can I make a go ahead.
I was going to say, so my question on this, and what I'm hearing here is, I've sort of come into this, I think, possibly with a similar understanding to Nick, in that, to me, this whole DevOps movement and continuous improvement methodology is very focused on how you iterate change through your business, right? Or through your application development lifecycle, possibly through your configuration lifecycle of your infrastructure. But it sounds to me like this is a tool that you could use to actually help with things like updating, right? Security updates and things like that on your operating systems. I mean, we know right now, and we talk about it all the time on this podcast, right, that you got to do the basics right first if you want to be secure. You got to get your stuff patched and updated. And if you look at what's happening in sort of the ransomware landscape right now, realistically, like, the barrier to entry has never been lower for these guys, because as soon as a patch hits the market, they're basically reverse engineering that patch, and they're going after every single environment that hasn't yet updated it, right? So essentially there's a clock or a stopwatch that starts as soon as someone releases a patch. Every patch Tuesday, these guys are reverse engineering, guys and gals, folks are reverse engineering updates, and they're going after trying to actively exploit environments that haven't yet updated their systems. So, and it sounds to me like these types of tools that we're talking about here might actually help and can help organizations with that. Because let's be honest, updating stuff is hard, right? I mean, even, we all have home networks that probably are larger than some small businesses, and updating everything on your home network is hard, right? I threw out an internet router the other day because the ISP, my very cool ISP here in Australia, wouldn't let me update the firmware because they lock it to their own firmware to me, that's unacceptable, right? Like if I cannot update something, that's not acceptable. Now, most people don't care about that and will quite happily continue to use that. And I'm sure I'll be able to sell it on eBay, but it's not something that I want to do, right? But updating stuff is hard. We've seen it time and time again. And so I like what I'm hearing here, because it sounds like, perhaps the answer to our questions have been under our nose all along.
So,
but it's
yes,
not easy. Sorry, Prashanth. It's not easy. I mean, you have this learning curve of having to learn this tool chain thing, right? And most of us who come out of the infrastructure landscape understand patching, and there's a WSUS server, or there's something that spits out RPMs, and somehow things get updated, and we've got a rough control over it because now it's scheduled, and at least we can go to the control panel and we can look at things, right? And then the industry changed and PowerShell came along, and we had PowerShell desired state configuration, which was a little, to be fair, still is a mystery to a lot of people, right? So now you're saying to IT pros, not only for their homes, but also I'm patching with SCCM, config manager or MEM. I'm patching with
away your
something,
age
right?
here, Nick.
Sorry?
You're giving away your age here, Nick.
Well, I like to say I'm rather giving away my wisdom. So you understand this patching thing, right? And that in itself is hard. So now you're saying, hang on, folks, DevOps, right? I want you to embrace DevOps for patching, and brains are just going to melt down.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, patching is important. It's essential evil in many ways. But I think that's not, that's a problem. But I think going back to what Chris was saying on maintaining that baseline security, there is a bigger problem than that, which is knowing what is secure. Right? And to actually ensure that what is secure is made available. So, and goes back to, again, that's a very people-centric problem, because you have CISOs or security professionals who knows what is the version which is acceptable, right? I say acceptable because I think the risk capacity is different in different organizations. Sometimes some version of some CVEs are acceptable, but let's say there are SMEs who know what is a version of per a specific software which you are allowed to use in your organization as per your risk appetite. But the irony is they have no influence even today in many organizations to make sure that that is implemented. All they do is send out mails or threaten, to stop the next deployment if that is not rolled out, or there is waivers that are provided for 3 months, 6 months, and so on, because they have no influence of making sure that this right software is deployed. And Chris, the organizations which are moving fast, they have realized this very, very early, and they have made sure that the people who know the security and compliance aspect, they tell that if you are going to use, let's say, JDK, for example, should you use OpenJDK or should you use Oracle JDK? Right? Developers mostly, if you let them, they choose OpenJDK, or at least that's what was my preference, because there was a notion of it's free. Keeping that philosophy aside, but people make such choices. But how do you ensure that from day one you have taken the software which you believe is safe for your organization? It starts from there, and that also is possible by this end state configuration, and it is possible purely because of codifying things. If organizations have not embraced infrastructure as code, maybe they can do all these things, but I'll take a leap and say it's like very, very difficult and almost impossible for them to make it seamless. Right? If they take infrastructure as code, then if we go back to our development days, if I have a piece of code, I can test it. Right? I write a unit test and I see if it's matching. Is my operating system version matching to what my CISO wants? Right? And they can write these test cases. which says, okay, RHEL 8 so and so version, OpenJDK is not acceptable, right? Oracle JDK is what we want. So they write this so-called test, and it is tested against this configuration. And every time the IT operator changes the version of a particular software, it can be tested against this policy that a CISO or someone has written or help author. Right? So this becomes seamless if you think about it as a code. And then, I mean, there are other challenges, but I think if you wherever organizations have embraced this as a code, then security, compliance, they are very logical next steps, and they are very, very smooth as compared to other organizations which have not.
I'd like to take us back to something that we were talking about off air, Prashanth, if you remember. And it's a little bit controversial. So I'd like to make the statement, and then I'd like you to unpack it a little bit. And what we said, or actually I believe, I think it was you who said this, is that developers have got more power than the CISO.
Yeah, I mean, let me rephrase that now, because that is for sure going to be controversial. But I think what is more acceptable and also close to reality is the purchasing power has moved, or purchasing decision has moved from CISO to developers, right? Especially in the cloud native domain. So I have a fresh graduate in my team who has made decision to use a new AWS service, right? And our CISO team has no clue about it, because if they do an audit on a quarterly basis or a 6-month basis, that's how they work. But our developer has gone ahead and started using this service, and it is in production, right? This is counter to what used to happen in the past, right? CISOs or CIO used to make the decision of you got to use, like, let's go back to Oracle JDK, right? You have license only for Oracle JDK, you can't use OpenJDK, or you have to use RHEL, not CentOS. And those things were enforceable because in the infrastructure team or CISO team was kind of guardian. But now the decision making is so decentralized that the purchasing power has moved from CISO to a developer.
Wow.
And
Warren,
that's
you
scary.
had a reaction in all of that. And
Hey?
to be fair, this is what you used to do for a living, right? So if we wind back 1 or 2 or 15 years, this was you sitting in a data center at 3 o'clock in the morning, having to deploy code and fixing stuff when it broke.
Yeah, look, but you know, I think
Not on AWS though.
definitely. Well, no, I mean, I don't even think there was an AWS when that happened. And I remember I was using Subversion, so there was no Git. It was Subversion, and you would check your Puppet manifests into Subversion, and that is how you would roll out your changes. That would be the way to roll out a patch or a new application. And then setting up of the machine was Spacewalk, if I remember correctly, with CentOS. So it was CentOS, and then Spacewalk used to do base config and just make sure that Puppet got installed. once that was there, you used DNS and the prefix of the DNS host name to determine what software the machine got. so you renamed the machine. That was a bit of a problem. But yeah, I mean, back then that was what, 2,500, 3,000 servers for like 10 people. But it's as Prashanth said, it's, you know, it's gotten to the point now that if there's no guardrails in place, and speaking of which, guardrails is also an infrastructure as code thing now. So, you know, policy management is also codified now. So you can go and say, you're not allowed to deploy X and you're not allowed to deploy Y. No public IP addresses can be built in Azure. No, you know, public IP addresses can be built in AWS, whatever the case may be. And so now we've gotten to the point that you can sort of control those things. But again, as Prashanth said, if a developer sees something new, he's going to try it.
Yes.
Correct.
You will.
And to Warren, your point, there is a small but very important change there. Whatever you said, developer cannot use this port, or you cannot use this service. That was there previously also, but it was post fact, and it was an incident, right? But what has changed now because of all these tools, infrastructure as code, policy as code, compliance and code, these things are much ahead in the development or deployment lifecycle. So before you deploy something onto production in your dev instance or in your integration itself, because the policy is codified, you get alerted, and just like unit test failing, your security test fails. So you cannot move your infrastructure changes from development to integration. Right? You have to engage with your CISO, you have to engage with that security or compliance professional then and there, either update the policy, get a waiver, or change your infrastructure configuration.
I was dealing with a customer the other day who's also financial services customer, and they've got this great way of working at the moment where what they'll do is they'll take a specific product or service. Let's say it's Synapse, or it's Azure App Service, or it's a storage account, or whatever the case would be is, and they'll take that particular service and they'll look at what features are available for that service, what can be turned on, what can be turned off. Okay. And then what they'll do is they'll build an infrastructure as code template, and they will put that in a repository. And then they will say, you want to use it? It comes from that repo. So if anybody wants to deploy any sort of service, they have to deploy it as infrastructure as code from that specific repo, because then they know that it's configured the way it should be. Now, you can't deploy anything if it's not there. You don't have access to the Azure portal. There's no browser access here to go and deploy something or change a setting or whatever. Has to be done via the code. So, you can then ensure, and look, from that perspective, I mean, then what happens is they don't actually have to have such hectic policy management to begin with, right, in the start, because nobody can deploy anything unless it's been approved in that repo first, which is another way of looking at it.
In fact, this is exactly what we are seeing in many of our large financial organizations, customer base. They do the same thing. Right? There is a centralized team who kind of continuously work on creating different version of these infrastructure as code, which has security policies baked into it. And there are different variations for dev, integration, production. Of course, the degree kind of becomes more severe when you go towards production. And then the application development teams have flexibility to take this and deploy. And the advantage of this is one application team is not blocked. At the same time, from day one, they are compliant and they are secure.
So, so a question I have, I guess, Prashanth, is, let's say, because we've talked about a lot of things over the last sort of 54 minutes or so, right? We've talked about, and we've named a lot of things. We've talked about infrastructure as code. We've talked about Puppet, and we've talked about Chef and all of these other things. Let's say I'm someone listening to the show right now, and I'm interested in getting a little bit more involved in with infrastructure as code and learning a little bit more about DevOps. Like, where do I even start at this point? Because to me, it sounds like there are so many options around there. You end up getting this sort of analysis paralysis because you look at things and you're just like, I don't even know what. Do I look at ARM templates? Do I look at Bicep? What do I do? What would you suggest to someone like that?
So one, I think DevOps is popular because of the very, very vibrant community it has. Right? So you don't have to feel alone. There are so many experts, and it's not a new concept anymore. There are community events that are happening all the time. For example, we are doing ChefConf, which is one of the DevOps community event where people love to gather, and we have an approximately 30-70, where 30% of presentation is from Chef employees, 70% is from the customers and community. Right? So one place is to hang out in those sort of community. I think KCBC was one of them. Like, there are DevOps days that are happening in various places. So, ChefConf is next week. So anyone who's interested can hang around in those kind of events. And there you get real experience, people with real experience. They talk about what problem they have solved, they had initially, and how did they solve. Like, this is I would say for little advanced people who have got a flavor of what DevOps is or what infrastructure as code is. They have applied some of these things in their organizations, but are having hurdles. And this is at a practitioner level. I think when I think about DevOps, I always think that we need to appeal to practitioners because they are the ones who have a lot of pain. Management, of course, they sign the check, but their objective is faster time to market, lesser defects, the metrics that help the business. But the real pain is is faced by people in the trenches. So I think these community events are focused towards those practitioners, and ChefConf like events help advanced, intermediate to advanced users to get those nuggets of experience and apply it in their organization. For example, a couple of years ago, we learned, right, in Chef, we learned that organizations like Uber and Facebook are using Chef to manage their desktop in a zero-touch manner. So the experience that a Uber employee gets is a sealed MacBook Pro or MacBook arrive at their doorstep. They open and they have received a username, password in their personal email ID. They provide that, and after that, they have to do nothing. There is no IT administrator involved. There is no call to your organization. Yeah, it installs Chef Client, and once Chef Client is installed, then Chef Client kind of pulls all the software that is required and brings the laptop to an end state desired configuration. We learned about it, and then we figured out how can we make a product out of it, and we productized, and it's a thing now, right? Chef Desktop Manager is a thing because of our community kind of talking to us and telling how it can be done.
That's so cool.
Right?
That is cool.
Yes.
That's so cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Remember those days when we had like in-person conferences? Actually, you know what? I just got back traveling from a couple over in America, and man, I had a blast because it was so good to just be in with people doing community stuff, and online is great. It makes it accessible to other folks who maybe can't travel, but that community rubbing shoulders, that type of stuff is just invaluable. It really is, and it was very energizing for me to be in there. Sorry to detract, but I think that's a really good place. So you're saying community and community events is a good place to start. Are there any online resources or anything like that you think would be sort of helpful, valuable?
Yeah, of course. I think there are 2 to 3. I think CI/CD and infrastructure as code. These are the two I would say as fundamental for anyone who wants to start as DevOps in their journey. So Terraform, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, we are the players in infrastructure as code. Learning about these products, although Bicep and Terraform I'll put in one category, Puppet, Chef, Ansible I'll put in another category, but infrastructure as code, learning about it is one aspect, and then CI/CD is another aspect. GitOps is another thing to learn about. It kind of has made seamless migration, integration with CI/CD and few other things. So I would say CI/CD, infrastructure as code, and GitOps. These are the 3 resources that people should look for. I can send some links if you have show notes, which I can put in.
That'd be great. That would be great. Okay, well, thank you for that. That's been, I think that's super helpful. And any links or anything like that, we'll be sure to put them in the show notes. So before we go, is there anything that you want to plug? Particularly, I know you mentioned ChefConf. Also, how would you like to be found on social media or things like that? Twitter, LinkedIn, those places. So
I'm mostly active on LinkedIn. Prashanth Nanjundappa is how you can find me. I'll send the link, and if you can put that on notes, I'll be happy to talk to the people who are listeners of your podcast and see what appealed to them, what sounded like bullshit, right? And maybe we can learn, we can have a conversation and see how we can make things better. And second, we talked about ChefConf. Maybe let me talk about that and say that I think September 2nd is where we are having ChefConf for 2 days. And if you are interested to know about compliance as code, security as code, infrastructure as code, do join us. We have actually folks, some really practitioners coming and talking to us. In fact, organizations like Google is coming and talking on how they are using Chef Inspect and to secure Kubernetes, or actually to maintain compliance in Kubernetes. And SAP is another large deployment where they have about 9 to 10 million cloud resources, which they are maintaining continuous compliance through compliance code. So you have great practices that will be shared. Not all are Chef related, but there's a flavor of Chef in it. Even if you are not a Chef customer, if you want to learn about infrastructure code, compliance code, policies code, that's a great way to hang out. And would love to have any conversations. You should reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I can connect back with any of you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And you said Kubernetes, that you made Warren happy. His day is just going to be amazing now.
That's right.
Well, Prashanth, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time and really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for hosting me. It was fun.